She was supposed to be dead. He had stood over her grave. He had read her name carved in marble. He had spent 6 years building an empire out of grief and rage, and the kind of silence that replaces a man's soul when the one person he loved more than his own blood is taken from him. 6 years. And then a 5-year-old girl with pigtails and paint-stained fingers grabbed his wrist across a dinner table, pointed at the black rose tattooed on his skin, and said 4 words that collapsed his entire world. "My mum has this." Darian Miles did not flinch. He did not breathe. He simply looked at the child and realized she had his eyes. The city of Chicago did not sleep. It simply changed shifts. By day, it belonged to the lawyers, the bankers, the aldermen who shook hands in marble lobbies and smiled for cameras outside courthouses. By night, it belonged to Darian Miles. He was 38 years old, 6'2", and built like a man who had never once in his life been allowed the luxury of softness. His hair was black, cut close at the sides, longer at the top, not because he cared about fashion, but because his barber, a 70-year-old Sicilian named Sal Bianchi, who ran a shop on West Grand Avenue, refused to cut it any other way. Darian let him. Sal was one of perhaps 4 people in the world Darian genuinely trusted. He was not handsome in any conventional, approachable sense. He was striking the kind of face that made people look twice and then immediately wish they hadn't. A jaw like something carved from limestone. Dark eyes that absorbed everything and reflected nothing. A thin scar running from the corner of his left eye toward his cheekbone, courtesy of a knife fight in Naples when he was 19, and still learning that the world was not going to be kind to him simply because he was Angelo Miles's son. Angelo Miles, the man who had built the Miles Syndicate from a 2-room apartment in Bridgeport and a willingness to do what other men wouldn't. Angelo was dead now, a stroke, 4 years ago, which Darian had chosen to believe, despite every instinct telling him otherwise. Some wars were better left unfought. Darian had inherited everything: the docks along the lakefront, the construction contracts, the network of restaurants and dry cleaning chains that moved money as efficiently as they moved linguine and linen. He had also inherited the enemies, the obligations, and the seat at the table that required a man to be simultaneously judge, executioner, and diplomat at every waking hour. What no one had inherited was the grief. That belonged to him alone. His office occupied the top floor of a building on Michigan Avenue that officially housed a private equity firm called Alcazar Capital. The office itself was deceptively simple dark wood, leather chairs, a wall of windows overlooking the lake. On the credenza behind his desk sat a single framed photograph. Not of his father, not of his mother. God rest her. Not of the men who had bled for him. It was a photograph of a woman. Dark hair, warm brown eyes, a smile that looked like it had been borrowed from some kinder universe than the one they actually lived in. She was laughing at something off camera, her head tilted back, a glass of red wine in her hand. Isabella, his wife, dead 6 years. Killed by a car bomb on a Tuesday morning in October, when the leaves were just starting to turn, and she had been driving to her sister's apartment on the north side. The bomb had been meant for Darian. Everyone knew it. No one ever proved who sent it. Darian had his suspicions. He always had his suspicions. But suspicion without evidence was just another word for pain, and pain was something he had learned to seal behind cement walls and keep there. He had not been with another woman since Isabella died. He had not allowed himself dinner with a woman, a dance with a woman, eye contact held a beat too long with a woman. It was not a decision he had consciously made. It was simply the way things were, the way water runs downhill, not because anyone commands it, but because that is the nature of gravity. Which was why, when his enforcer and closest friend, Frank DeLuca, walked into his office on a Thursday evening in March and dropped a charity gala invitation on his desk, Darian looked at it, the way a man looks at a subpoena. "No," Darian said, without touching the envelope. "The alderman specifically asked for you," Frank said. He was a broad-shouldered man of 51, with a grey-streaked beard and the tired eyes of someone who had seen enough to stop being surprised by anything. "Children's Hospital fundraiser. Your father donated to them every year. If you don't show, people talk. People always talk. They talk differently when they think you've gone soft. Boss." Darian looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up the envelope. "1 hour," he said. "Then I'm gone." He stayed for 3. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Langham Hotel on Wacker Drive. 600 people in black tie, crystal chandeliers, a string quartet playing something Vivaldi, and enough old Chicago money in one room to repave the entire lakeshore. Darian arrived late, on purpose. He moved through the room with Frank at his shoulder and 2 other men positioned at the exits, a habit so ingrained he no longer consciously decided to do it. People noticed him. They always noticed him. The slight shift in posture, the careful widening of personal space, the way conversations paused and then resumed at a slightly higher pitch of cheerfulness. It was the particular social choreography that surrounded powerful, dangerous men, everyone performing normalcy extra hard to prove they weren't afraid. He shook hands with Alderman Roy Cassidy, a heavy-set man with a politician's eyes and a firm grip. He nodded at 3 other faces he recognized. He accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and stationed himself near the window. Watching the room with the same quiet attention, he gave everything. That was when he saw her. She was not the most glamorous woman in the room. Not by the conventional metrics on offer. That evening there were women draped in Oscar de la Renta and Valentino. Women trailing perfume like exhaust. This woman was wearing a deep green dress. Simple, floor length. Her dark hair pulled back loosely. She was standing near the silent auction tables, talking to an older couple. And she was gesturing with her hands the way people do when they're saying something they actually mean, rather than something they've rehearsed. What arrested him was not her beauty, though she was beautiful. What arrested him was the absence of the thing he was used to seeing. She wasn't afraid. Most people who caught his eye across a room performed one of 2 reactions. They either looked quickly away, or they performed a studied non-reaction that was its own form of fear. This woman looked at him directly, a brief, calm glance, the way you look at a lamp or a painting and then simply returned her attention to the couple she was speaking to, as if he were ordinary, as if he were anyone. He found himself walking toward the auction table. "You're bidding on the spa package," he said, which was the first thing that came out of his mouth, and which he immediately recognized as the least elegant opening line he had managed in 20 years. She looked up, closer now. He could see that her eyes were a warm, complicated shade, not quite brown, not quite amber, something in between, like the color of good whiskey held up to light. "The children's wing renovation," she said, gesturing to the adjacent display board. "The spa package is for people who want to feel good about themselves. The wing renovation is for kids who actually need something." She paused, tilting her head slightly. though I suppose the two aren't mutually exclusive. He didn't smile often. He felt the edge of one now. You work here at Children's Hospital. Pediatric oncology, she said. 3 years. Before that, I was at Northwestern. She extended her hand with the ease of someone accustomed to meeting strangers professionally. Serena Novak. Darian Miles. Not a flicker. No widening of the eyes. No imperceptible tightening around the mouth. Either she genuinely didn't know the name, which would make her approximately the only adult in Chicago, or she knew it and had decided it was not her problem. Are you actually interested in donating to the wing renovation? She said. Or were you just running out of things to look at? He laughed. A short sound, unused, like a door opened in a room that had been locked for years. Both, he said honestly. They talked for 40 minutes. He wrote a check, a large one, which she accepted with professional composure and no gushing. She told him about her work in terms that were specific and unsentimental, and quietly devastating the way children processed illness differently from adults. The particular courage of a 7-year-old deciding to be brave for their parents' sake. He listened in a way he rarely listened to anyone, without calculating, without strategizing, simply present. He did not ask for her number. She did not offer it. But she left him with something he hadn't felt in 6 years. The sensation that the world still contained something worth wanting. He saw her again, 10 days later, by accident, or what he told himself was an accident, though Frank would later point out that Darian had chosen to eat lunch at the cafe on Erie Street 3 times that week for no stated reason, when he had a perfectly functional kitchen in his office building. She was at an outdoor table with a child. The girl was small, perhaps 5 years old, with dark hair in 2 uneven pigtails, the kind of pigtails assembled by a person who is trying and running late. She had paint on her right hand, fading, blue and yellow, and she was in the process of deconstructing a grilled cheese sandwich with the systematic focus of a small engineer. She was also, simultaneously, talking, not to her mother, to a pigeon on the sidewalk. You can't have any. She was telling it. It's mine. You have your own food. You have worms. Darian stopped walking. The girl looked up at him, not with the wariness most children showed around strangers, particularly large, severe-looking strangers in expensive coats. She looked at him with the pure, open assessment of a child who had not yet learned to perform caution. You're very tall, she announced. Lily, Serena said, not looking up from her phone immediately. Don't talk to... She looked up, stopped. Oh, I'm sorry, he said. I was walking past. Sure you were, she said, but without hostility. The faint ghost of the same dry composure she'd had at the gala. She looked at her daughter. This is Lily. Lily, this is Mr. Miles. He's very tall. Yes, you can stop staring. I'm not staring, Lily said, already back to her sandwich. I'm looking. Staring is rude, Mum said. Your mother sounds wise, Darian said. He wasn't sure why he said the next thing. He was not a man who imposed himself on situations where he had not been invited. But something the pigeon, the lopsided pigtails, the sheer ordinary warmth of the scene untethered something in him. May I? He said, gesturing toward the empty chair. Serena looked at him for a moment, reading him. He thought the same direct, unhurried assessment she'd used at the gala. 10 minutes, she said. We have somewhere to be. He sat down. He ordered coffee. Lily informed him, unprompted, that her favorite color was purple, but also blue sometimes. that her teacher, Mrs. Flanagan, had a hamster named Senator, and that grilled cheese was objectively the best food in the world, and anyone who disagreed was wrong. He found himself listening to this with the same quality of attention he'd given Serena at the gala, which surprised him. "What's that?" Lily asked, pointing at his wrist. He followed her gaze. His sleeve had ridden up slightly, exposing the edge of the tattoo on the inside of his left wrist. A black rose single stem, the petals rendered with precise, almost architectural detail. He'd had it done in Rome 14 years ago, the week he married Isabella. She had gotten the matching one on the inside of her right wrist. It had been their private ceremony within the ceremony, something just for them, away from the Miles family theatre. "It's a rose," he said. Lily studied it, tilted her head. Then she said, matter-of-factly, "My mum has this tattoo, too." The table went very still. Darian looked at the girl. Then he looked at Serena. Serena had gone the colour of chalk. Her coffee cup was midway to her mouth, and she set it down with a slight, distinct tremor that she immediately controlled. Her expression did something complicated, a half-second of naked terror, instantly contained. But he had been reading people's faces for 20 years. He had seen it. "Lots of people have rose tattoos," Serena said, her voice perfectly level. "It's on your wrist," Lily said helpfully. "The same place. I've seen it." "Lily, finish your lunch." "But—" "Lily." The girl subsided, returning to her sandwich with a philosophical shrug. Darian picked up his coffee. He looked out at the street. His heart was doing something he hadn't given it permission to do. "I should let you get to your appointment," he said quietly. Serena met his eyes. He held her gaze for exactly long enough to let her know he was not going to pretend the last 30 seconds had not happened. Then he stood, left a 50 on the table, and walked away. He made it half a block before he had to stop and put his hand against a building and breathe. Back in his office that evening, Darian sat alone. He pulled out the photograph from Isabella's file, not the one on his credenza, but the one from the investigation, the one the detective had taken at the crash site before the fire had consumed the car completely. The investigators had worked from dental records, from jewelry recovered in the wreckage, her ring, her bracelet, partially melted. The body had been too damaged for open casket. He remembered identifying her personal effects. The ring he had placed on her finger the day they married. The small diamond bracelet her father, Victor Marchetti, had given her for their first anniversary. The investigators had been gentle with him. Everyone had been very gentle. He opened his laptop and typed 2 words into a search field connected to a private database, his IT man. A quiet genius named Gordon Frey, maintained for him, Serena Novak. The results were thin, deliberately thin, he thought now, with the specific kind of instinct that had kept him alive in dangerous situations. A nursing license issued 6 years ago by the state of Illinois, an address in Lincoln Park, a daughter listed in school enrollment records, Lily Ann Novak, age 5, born 7 months after the death of Isabella Miles. Born 7 months after the death, his throat closed. He called Frank DeLuca at 11:30 at night. "I need you to pull the original Isabella investigation file," he said. "Everything. The forensics, the pathology report, everything." Silence. Then, "Boss, we went through all of that 6 years ago, every lead." "I know what we went through," Darian said. "Pull it again." Another silence. "You saw something." "I don't know what I saw," Darian said. That's why I need the file. It took Frank 3 days. On the 4th day, he came into Darian's office, closed the door, and set a manila folder on the desk. The pathology report, Frank said. The one we were given at the time. He paused. And the one I pulled from the county medical examiner's archive this morning. Original filing. Darian looked at him. They're different, Frank said flatly. Darian opened the folder. The report they had been given in the immediate aftermath of the explosion had listed the deceased as a female. Mid-20s, identified via dental records. Records provided by Dr. Harold Stern, Isabella's dentist of 4 years. The report Gordon had now pulled from the county archive was filed 48 hours later, standard procedure. The final version, it listed minor corrections to the forensic findings. But it also listed, in a footnote that would mean nothing to anyone who wasn't looking for it, that the dental records used for the initial identification had been supplied by a source other than the medical examiner's standard protocol, a procedural irregularity attributed to the chaotic circumstances of the investigation and signed off on by a deputy M. Iwapo, who had retired the following year. The records had been manufactured. Darian sat back. He did not feel what he might have expected, to feel relief. Joy. He felt something colder and more complicated, a seismic shifting beneath the foundations of 6 years of certainty. He felt, specifically, the question, if she was alive, why didn't she come back to me? And beneath that question, like something moving in deep water who helped her disappear. And why he picked up his phone and called Gordon Frey. "Find me everything on a doctor. Harold Stern," he said. "Dentist, Northside, retired. And find me the priest who administered last rites at St. Michael's the week of the explosion. A father." He checked the file. Father Callum Briggs. "And the woman," Gordon said carefully. Darian looked out the window at the lake, grey and restless in the early April light. "Not yet," he said. Father Callum Briggs was 72 years old, living in a retirement community in Evanston. He had a bad hip and a garden he tended with remarkable dedication for a man of his age. He was also, it turned out, the person who had married Darian's parents 39 years ago, which meant he had known Darian since before Darian had opinions about anything. Darian drove to Evanston alone. He sat across from the old priest at a table in the community garden and didn't bother with preamble. "She's alive," Darian said. Father Callum looked at him for a long time. Then he folded his hands on the table and looked at the garden. "I wondered when you'd come," he said. "Tell me." The old man breathed out. "She came to me 3 weeks before the explosion. She was frightened. She told me she had discovered something about you, about your family, something she couldn't go to you with." He paused. She had just found out she was pregnant. Darian said nothing. His hands were flat on the table. "She didn't tell me everything she knew," the priest continued. "She told me enough. She said if she disappeared, if she died, she needed someone to help her stay dead." He looked at Darian. "I helped her. God forgive me. I believed she was in danger. I still believe that." "What did she discover?" Darian asked. His voice was very even. The evenness of a man keeping something immense under extraordinary compression. "She overheard a phone call," Father Callum said. "In your house. She told me it was someone very close to you, discussing the shipment of something she used the word cargo, which she understood immediately was not cargo. People. Darian. They were discussing moving people, women and girls. The silence in the garden was absolute. She said the voice was your brother's. The priest said quietly, "Nico." Darian closed his eyes. Niccolo Miles, 8 years younger, dark and charming and possessed of a talent for seeming harmless. Darian's father had loved Nico with the particular, indulgent love that second children sometimes received, the love without expectation. Darian had loved his brother with the loyalty of someone who assumed blood meant alignment. She was afraid, Father Callum said, that if she told you, you already knew, or that you would protect him. She was afraid of what he might do to her, and to the child if she stayed. So she ran. He looked at Darian steadily. "I am an old man, and I have spent my life in the business of judging what is good and what is harmful. She was not wrong to run. Darian." "She could have trusted me," Darian said. "Could she?" The priest said simply. "You were Angelo Miles's son. You ran the organization your father built. How was she to know where you stood on what your brother was doing?" Darian stood up. His chair scraped back. "Where did Stern come in?" he said. "Harold Stern was Isabella's godfather. He owed her father a debt from before you were ever in the picture. He handled the dental record paperwork." The priest paused. "He died 2 years ago. Natural causes. He never told anyone. And the new name, that was her own doing. She was a resourceful woman. Darian, you married a resourceful woman." He drove back to the city with his hands locked on the wheel and his mind entirely. Terrifyingly clear. Nico. Human trafficking. Running it under Darian's organization, beneath his notice, leveraging his infrastructure, his protection, his name. And Isabella had known. He called Gordon Frey. "I need everything on Nico's operations for the last 6 years, he said. "Everything he's touched that I haven't directly supervised. Every account, every shell company, every shipment." "Boss," Gordon said carefully. "If I start pulling Nico's finances, he has his own people watching for—" "I know," Darian said. "Be quiet about it." "And Serena Novak." Darian was quiet for a moment. "Set up a secure apartment," he said, "and don't tell anyone." He went to her building on a Wednesday evening, unannounced. He rang the buzzer and stood in the spring rain, which he thought was probably appropriate for what was about to happen. The intercom crackled. "Who is it? You know who it is," he said. The silence lasted 7 seconds. He counted. The door buzzed open. Her apartment was on the 4th floor, small, warm, full of the particular organized chaos of a working parent. Children's artwork covered a section of the kitchen wall with thumbtacks. A small yellow bicycle leaned against the hallway. It smelled like something cooking, garlic and herbs, and underneath that, something floral, not perfume. The specific smell of a home that is lived in fully. She was standing in the middle of the living room when he came in. She'd had time to compose herself. Her arms were crossed, her chin was up, her expression carefully neutral, but her hands were wrapped tight around her own forearms. He looked at her. He didn't say anything for a moment. "How long?" he said finally. "Darian, how long did you know you were pregnant before you ran?" She swallowed. 3 weeks. "And you decided I couldn't know." "I decided she couldn't know what kind of world she'd be born into," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were very bright. "I decided that I would rather she never know her father than grow up inside your family. My family," he said, "has a member who was using my supply routes to traffic women." Her arms dropped. Something shifted in her face, not surprise, He realized, but recognition. The recognition of something finally arriving that she had been waiting for. "You found out," she said. "Tell me what you know," he said. "All of it." She sat down. He remained standing. She had been at their house, the Miles house in Kenilworth, on a Sunday in September, almost 7 years ago. Darian had been in New York. She had gone back alone to retrieve a coat she'd forgotten. She had let herself in through the back entrance, and she had heard Nico on the phone in Angelo's old study. The door was ajar. She had stood in the hallway, not wanting to interrupt, and she had heard names, numbers, routes. The word delivery used to describe young women. The name of a contact in Bratislava. A figure, a dollar figure that made her stomach lurch. "I stood there for maybe 2 minutes," she said. "And then I walked backward down the hallway and out the door, and I drove to a parking lot in Skokie, and I sat there for 4 hours. "Why didn't you come to me?" Darian said. Not with anger. With the specific anguish of a man asking a question he has already answered for himself. "Because 2 days later, your brother came to dinner," she said. "And you sat next to each other and you laughed at each other's jokes, and you defended him when your father criticized him. And I sat across the table watching, and I thought, he doesn't know. Maybe he doesn't know. But maybe." She stopped. "Maybe I did." She met his eyes. "I couldn't risk it. I was pregnant. I couldn't risk being wrong." "You could have asked me," he said. "You could have." "With what proof?" she said quietly. "A conversation I overheard, your brother's word against mine, inside your organization, inside your family. Your father was still alive then. He already thought I was too independent, too—" She stopped. "I was 26 years old. I was terrified. I did what I thought I had to do." He turned away. He walked to the window and looked down at the street. A woman walking a dog. An ordinary evening. He breathed. "She looks like you," he said. His voice came out rough. He heard Serena make a sound, not quite a word. "The eyes," he said. "I didn't notice at first, at the table. But when I went back and looked at her," he stopped. "I know," Serena said softly. "I know she does." He turned. "Her name. Lily." She paused. "Lily Isabella Novak." He looked at her. "I wasn't going to take everything from her," Serena said, and her voice finally broke on the last word. "Just barely. I wasn't whatever I had to do. I wasn't going to take that from her." He crossed the room in 4 steps, and he stood in front of her, and he did not touch her. He looked at her face. Isabella's face. Serena's face. The same face, and he felt the 6 years of grief rearrange themselves into something else entirely. Something that had no word for it yet. Something that would take a long time to become a word. "She goes to bed at 8:30, Serena said, barely audible. If you want to stay, until she wakes up. She'd want to see you again." A pause. "She told me she liked you. She said you were tall and quiet like a stuffed bear." Gerald. He sat down on the arm of the couch, pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a moment. Then he straightened. "I need you to listen to me carefully," he said. "What I found about Nico, it's not finished yet. Gordon is still pulling the financials. When it's complete, I'm going to have to move, and I'm going to need you and Lily somewhere safe until it's done." She looked at him steadily. "How safe? The safest I can make it." And then he met her eyes. "Then we figure out the rest." He paused. "If that's something you're willing to do." She was quiet for a long time, long enough that he heard, from down the hallway, the small sounds of a child asleep, a breath, a shift, a murmur. Life he had not known existed, going on in its ordinary way. "I'm not Isabella Miles anymore," she said finally. "That woman made different choices than I would make now. I'm not going back to what that was." "I'm not asking you to," he said. "I'm not the same man either." Another long silence. "There are 2 conditions," she said. "Name them." "Lily doesn't know anything about what you do. Not until she's old enough to decide for herself what she wants to know." "Agreed. And if I ever tell you to stop, if I ever say it's too much or too dangerous, you listen to me. Not later. Not after one more thing. You listen." He looked at her for a long moment. "Agreed," he said. She breathed out, nodded once, very slightly. Then she stood, smoothed her hands over her dress in a gesture that was entirely her own practical, finishing, and walked to the kitchen. "I made pasta," she said, her back to him. "There's enough." He sat at her kitchen table and ate pasta for the first time in 6 years, at a table that felt like something other than an extension of work. And outside the window, Chicago glittered in the wet April dark. And down the hall, a little girl with his eyes slept with a bear named Gerald. And the world was irrevocably different than it had been that morning. Gordon Frey delivered the full financial picture 10 days later, on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain and burned coffee. And it was worse than Darian had imagined. He sat at his desk and read through the report twice, slowly, the way he read anything that required him to be certain he was not misunderstanding what he was seeing. Gordon had organized it cleanly, columns of figures, company names, shipping routes marked on a printed map with red lines, thin as sutures. 8 years of it, not 6, as Darian had assumed. 8, which meant Nico had started running the operation 2 full years before Isabella had overheard his phone call in the Kenilworth house. 2 years of infrastructure, of careful, deliberate construction, before she had stumbled into the hallway and heard the shape of it. $40 million, built on the suffering of hundreds of people, routed invisibly through 3 of Darian's logistics companies, companies that bore his authority, his signature on the foundational contracts, his name on the operating licenses. Pavel Horka, in Bratislava, had served as the European coordination point, a man connected to 4 Eastern European criminal networks with the casual confidence of someone who had never once expected to be caught. The women and girls moved through the network had been trafficked to private buyers across Europe and the Middle East, Gordon had included, in a separate subsection, his conservative estimate of the number of individual victims. Darian set the page down. He looked at the map with its thin red lines. He looked at it for a long time. Then he called Frank DeLuca in. Frank read the report standing up. He didn't speak until he'd read it to the end, which was one of the things Darian had always respected about him. Frank was not a man who reacted before he had finished looking. When he set the last page down, he stood quietly for a moment with his hands in his pockets. "How do you want to handle it?" Frank said. "Legally," Darian said. Frank looked at him, not with surprise. Exactly, Frank had long since used up his capacity for surprise, but with the careful attention of a man making sure he was hearing correctly. "Federally," Darian said. "Every piece of documentation goes to the DOJ, anonymous, packaged properly, documented in a way that makes it usable, delivered through the right channel, the financials, the shell company structure, the routes, The Bratislava connection, everything, all of it. Frank was quiet for a moment. "You could handle it the other way," he said carefully. "Faster, quieter." "I could," Darian said. He picked up his pen and set it down again. "But I have a daughter who is going to grow up knowing who I am. And I've decided she's going to know something true about me." He paused. "Get it to Gordon. He knows the right channels." Frank held his gaze for a beat. Something moved across his face, not disagreement, not even reluctance, something closer to recognition, the particular expression of a man watching another man make a decision that costs him something and make it anyway. He nodded once, picked up the report, and walked out. Darian sat alone for a moment before picking up his phone. He thought about Nico, about the Sunday dinners in Kenilworth, all those years, about sitting next to his brother at his father's table, passing bread, pouring wine, the comfortable animal warmth of family. Nico telling a story badly and laughing at his own punchline before he reached it. Darian covering for him with their father. More than once, out of the reflexive loyalty of an older brother, all of that warmth, that ease, built on something that had been rotten underneath from the beginning. The grief of it was clean and cold and moved through him quickly. He let it go. He called Gordon. Niccolo Miles was arrested 6 weeks later on federal charges of human trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy. The arrest was conducted at a restaurant on Rush Street on a Thursday morning at 11 o'clock. Darian had not known the specific timing in advance, but he had known it was coming within a 2-week window, and he had arranged to be visible in a meeting with his attorney Bernard Cash at a Loop office building when it happened. That kind of visibility mattered. It would matter more in the weeks that followed. The news covered it extensively. Chicago Mafia figure arrested. Miles family scandal. Federal charges. The cable news cycle turned it over with the particular, voracious energy it reserved for stories that combined organized crime and moral enormity. Darian watched none of it. He issued a statement through Bernard, measured, formal, cooperative, in tone, expressing that he was engaging fully with federal inquiries and that the described activities had been conducted without his knowledge or sanction. This was true in every way that mattered. The federal investigators, for their part, appeared to find this credible. The trail Gordon had laid was precise enough to illuminate Nico's operation, while making unmistakably clear the operational partition between what Nico had run and what Darian had run. It was, Bernard told him in a phone call afterward, about as clean an outcome as circumstances allowed. "Don't thank me," Darian said. "I didn't do it to be clean." Pavel Horka was extradited from Slovakia within the year. The network was dismantled systematically. The way rot is removed from a structure, carefully, from the outside in, making sure the weight-bearing elements survived while the damaged material was stripped away. Victims' advocates working alongside federal prosecutors located and assisted more than 60 women through the recovery effort. Darian made a donation substantial, anonymous to the advocacy organization leading that work. He told no one. It was not a gesture he required credit for. The week after Nico's arrest, he drove to Evanston. Father Callum Briggs was in the community garden when Darian arrived, kneeling by a row of dormant plants with his bad hip and an expression of serene stubbornness, as if daring the soil to disagree with him. He looked up when Darian came through the gate, and something settled in his face, the particular piece of an old man who has been waiting for a particular piece of news. Darian sat across from him at the garden table. "It's done," he said. The old priest nodded slowly. He folded his hands. He looked at Darian in the way he'd always looked at him, with the specific patience of a man who had watched Darian grow up and was still, after all these years, taking the measure of who he was becoming. "And the rest of it," Father Callum said. Darian looked at the garden, a long pause, not the silence of evasion, but of a man allowing himself to say something true out loud. "Working on it," he said. Father Callum smiled. Small, private, warm. "She was the most stubborn woman I ever helped," he said, present company excluded. "She's still stubborn," Darian said. "Good," the priest said. "You need that." The reconciliation didn't happen the way stories suggested it should. There was no single cinematic moment, no dramatic embrace, no rain-soaked declaration. They were both too shaped by 6 years of living separately for that. What there was, instead, was time. Slow, deliberate, imperfect time, accumulated in small quantities the way interest accrues quietly, without announcement, until one day you look and find there is more of it than you realized. He began coming to her apartment on Saturdays. Initially, in the explicit, structured context of being Lily's father, a role he approached with the concentrated seriousness he gave to things that genuinely frightened him, which meant he read 4 books on child development, asked Serena careful questions about Lily's routine and preferences, and showed up without fail, every Saturday, 9 o'clock, with orange juice. Because Lily had informed him on their second Saturday together that orange juice was a biological necessity, and that people who disagreed were simply wrong. Lily adapted to him with the extraordinary, unsentimental openness that young children reserved for things they had already decided were acceptable. She was not a child who needed elaborate emotional scaffolding. Serena had told her that her father had been lost, but was found now. Lily had absorbed this, asked whether it was like losing Gerald at the grocery store and then finding him behind the cereal boxes. Been told that, yes, something like that, and then shown him her drawings, explained the territorial dispute currently paralyzing relations between her 2 stuffed rabbits, and asked him if he could be impartial mediator on the blanket question. He was, he discovered, extremely good at stuffed rabbit diplomacy. One afternoon in October, a pale Saturday with thin gold light cutting through the apartment windows, he sat on Serena's couch with a document on his phone and Lily asleep against his leg. Gerald the bear wedged between them. Lily had gone down mid-sentence, the way small children do, as if a switch had simply been turned. He had stopped moving. He had not shifted his leg, adjusted his position, or reached for his coffee. He simply sat, his free hand resting near her shoulder, not quite touching. The document on his phone forgotten. Serena came to the kitchen doorway. She stood there for a moment he was not aware of, watching. A man who had run an empire for a decade, who had sat across from people who wanted him dead and never once shown them anything, sitting perfectly still on a second-hand couch so as not to disturb a sleeping 5-year-old. She went back to the kitchen. She stood at the counter with both hands braced against the edge and looked at the wall and let herself feel, for the first time in a long time, the specific quality of a thing that had stopped running. He appeared at the counter 20 minutes later, helping with dinner in the way of someone who was not good at it and refused to acknowledge this, holding a carrot with the expression of a man encountering a minor logistical problem. She said, quietly, I'm sorry I didn't trust you." He put the carrot down. He was quiet for a moment, in the way he was quiet when he was actually thinking rather than performing thought. "I'm sorry I built something that made it reasonable not to," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. The kitchen was warm and smelled like garlic, and the carrot sat between them on the counter like an unanswered question. "That's not a small thing," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." A beat of silence, not uncomfortable. The kind of silence two people share when they have said something true and are allowing it to settle. "I'm not sure what this is," she said. "What we're doing." "Neither am I," he said. "I need it to be slow." "I can be slow," he said. And then, with a quiet, wry edge she wasn't expecting, "I've been slow for 6 years." The laugh surprised her short, startled, genuine. He watched her with something careful and warm, occupying the same expression simultaneously, and she looked away first. "Stay for dinner," she said. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. In November, 8 months after Lily had pointed across a cafe table and unraveled everything, Darian began the long, expensive, legally intricate process of legitimizing his remaining holdings. He retained a specialist attorney alongside Bernard Cash, the kind who handled what was diplomatically called transitional restructuring for men in his specific professional situation. It was not a fast process. It would not be a cheap one. It would require strategic retreat from positions of influence he had spent years consolidating, and it would require a patience with legal timelines that did not come naturally to him. He did not tell Serena. He did not frame it as a gesture or attach it to a conversation. Gestures felt dishonest. This was simply a decision he was making, for reasons that were his own, and it would become visible through its consequences rather than its announcement. She found out because Frank DeLuca, who had developed an inexplicable and apparently unconditional devotion to Lily, and arrived at dinners bearing gifts of questionable appropriateness, mentioned it in passing over pasta, and then immediately wore the expression of a man who had miscalculated significantly. Serena looked at Darian. Darian looked at Frank with the particular quiet of a man composing a future conversation. "It was time," Darian said simply. "Why now?" Serena asked. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. He considered the question without deflecting from it. "Because I have someone to be worth something for," he said. He paused. "2 people." She didn't answer. She looked at the table for a moment, at her own hands. Then she reached across and covered his hand with hers briefly, warmly, without ceremony, and went back to her dinner. Frank DeLuca stared at his plate with the focused attention of a man trying very hard to be invisible. "Frank," Lily said, "you have pasta on your beard." "Thank you. Small one," Frank said. "What would I do without you?" "You'd have pasta on your beard," Lily said reasonably, and returned to her dinner with the satisfied finality of someone who has resolved a matter. On a Saturday in December, Darian took Lily to the Art Institute of Chicago. It was her idea. She had seen a photograph in a school book of the Thorne miniature rooms, 68 tiny domestic interiors preserved behind glass, and had decided, with the focused authority she brought to most things, that seeing them constituted an urgent priority. He had cleared his entire morning. He had, in the privacy of his own preparation, researched the miniature rooms at some length so that he would have something accurate to say about them. They stood together in front of a Flemish interior from the 17th century candlelight rendered in gold paint, tiny portraits on walls no bigger than postage stamps, a table set for a dinner that would never be eaten. Lily pressed her face close to the glass with the total, unself-conscious absorption she gave to anything she found genuinely fascinating. "Do you think little tiny people live in there?" she said. "No," Darian said. "An artist made them, to show what houses looked like a long time ago." She considered this. "So it's like a photograph, but 3D. "Yes," he said. "Exactly like that." She was quiet for a moment longer, her breath fogging the glass faintly. Then, without turning from the miniature room, in the same tone she might ask about lunch, "Do you like being my dad?" He looked down at her. Her pigtails were lopsided again. Her coat had a small paint stain on the left sleeve that Serena had clearly attempted to address. She was still looking at the tiny candlelit room, waiting for his answer with the patience of a child who already knew what it was going to be and simply wanted to hear it said. "Yes," he said. "I thought so," she said, matter-of-factly. "You're good at it." He put his hand on the top of her head. She leaned into it without looking away from the glass, warm and solid and entirely real against his palm. "Can we get hot chocolate after?" she said. "Yes. 2 marshmallows. Frank says only babies have 1 marshmallow. Frank," Darian said, "has opinions about everything." "I know," Lily said, stepping back from the glass and looking up at him with his own eyes. "It's annoying, but also helpful." He took her hand as they moved to the next room, and she let him, swinging it slightly, already looking ahead at what was coming next. He thought, briefly, of the photograph on his credenza. A woman laughing, a glass of wine, a moment preserved under glass, like one of these rooms stopped in time, immaculate, untouchable. He had spent 6 years tending that image like something sacred. He understood now that he had been confusing grief with loyalty and preservation with love. She was not the woman in the photograph. She was more harder and softer simultaneously, shaped by years of living he had not been present for, carrying things she was still carefully learning to put down. And he was not the man she had known either. What they were building now was not a restoration of something lost. It was something else entirely. Something new enough to be frightening, and real enough to be worth it. He walked through the Art Institute of Chicago on a December Saturday, with his daughter's hand in his, and behind them, the miniature rooms sat in their cases beautiful. Stopped, permanent, and ahead of them, the rest of the museum stretched onward, room after room, still to be discovered. And that is the story of how a black rosa tattoo, no bigger than a silver dollar, pressed into the inside of a wrist, became the thing that broke open a life, a loss, and a love that refused, despite every human effort, to stay buried. Darian Miles spent his life believing that the strongest thing a man could do was to shut a door and walk away. He was wrong. The strongest thing, the thing that cost him every carefully constructed wall, every year of armored silence, was to sit across a kitchen table in a small apartment in Lincoln Park, with pasta going cold on his plate and a little girl asleep down the hall, and say, "I'm still here. What do we do now? If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances, in the kind of love that is stubborn enough to survive 6 years of silence and grief and extraordinary circumstance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear that some things that seem finished aren't finished at all, and subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. There are more. There are always more. We'll see you in the next one.